June 6, 1944. The morning after Allied forces stormed the beaches of Normandy, a German artillery observer named Hauptmann Friedrich Weber crouched in a hedgerow near St. Lay, scanning the horizon through his field glasses. He had witnessed countless bombardments during his 3 years on the Eastern Front, survived the murderous Soviet Katyusha salvos that turned entire battalions into smoking craters. Nothing, he believed, could surprise him anymore. Then the sky tore apart. The sound arrived before the visual, a shrieking, demonic wail that made Weber's teeth ache. He pressed himself into the mud as the first salvo struck German positions 300 meters ahead. But these weren't the familiar whistle and crack of conventional artillery shells. This was something else entirely. Dozens of rockets, perhaps hundreds, ascended in a hellish cascade, each trailing smoke and fire. The explosions walked across the German defensive line with mechanical precision, turning foxholes into graves and reducing a panzer for tank to twisted metal sculpture. The entire bombardment lasted 43 seconds. Weber raised his head, ears ringing, and witnessed something that defied his military training, where he expected to see heavy artillery pieces being repositioned by crews of sweating men. He observed instead a simple American Trucka Tuanda Hafton cargo vehicle he'd seen abandoned along roads, dozens of times racing away from its firing position at 40 kilometers per hour. On its bed sat a framework of metal tubes, still smoking from the launch. The truck disappeared behind a tree line before his supporting mortar could plot coordinates. According to declassified records from the United States Army Center of Military History, this encounter represented Germany's first battlefield experience with the T-34 Calliope rocket launcher system. Though Wehrmacht intelligence reports from that period revealed profound confusion about what they had witnessed. The device mounted a rack of 60 M8 rocket tubes directly onto an M4 Sherman tank chassis, though variations soon appeared on standard trucks. German field reports from late June 1944 described these weapons as screaming cows, American Katyushas, or simply devil wagons. What Weber couldn't know, and what would perplex German intelligence officers for months, was that American engineers had accomplished something remarkable.
Through sheer pragmatic ingenuity.
While Soviet rocket artillery required specialized vehicles and elaborate launching platforms, the Americans had simply bolted rocket racks onto ordinary military trucks. The concept was almost laughably simple. Take a standard Dawson-Hoff cargo truck, weld a launch frame to its bed, wire up some firing controls, and transform it into a mobile rocket platform capable of delivering devastating firepower before vanishing into the countryside. The psychological impact exceeded the physical damage. German soldiers, accustomed to calculating artillery trajectories and predicting firing patterns, found themselves facing a weapon that struck without warning from positions that seemed to change with supernatural speed. Traditional counter-battery fire proved useless. By the time German gunners triangulated a firing position, the American trucks had already relocated, leaving only scorched grass and tire tracks. Weber survived that first encounter, but his report up the chain of command carried an unmistakable tremor of concern. The Americans had weaponized mobility itself, turning the humblest element of their vast motor pool into instruments of mobile thunder. November 9th, 1943, 9 months before Weber's harrowing experience, Colonel John Michelson sat in a cramped Pentagon office, staring at intelligence photographs from the Eastern Front. The images showed devastated German positions near Kursk. Testimony to the terrifying effectiveness of Soviet BM-13 Katyusha rocket launchers, Michelson, chief of the Ordnance Department's rocket development program, understood that American forces would soon face similar weapons from German Nebel warfare batteries in Europe. The United States needed a rocket artillery system, and it needed one immediately. Traditional military procurement moved at glacial pace. Design committees debated specifications for months. Prototypes underwent years of testing. Production contracts generated mountains of paperwork, but the calendar allowed no such luxuries. Supreme Commander Dwight Eisenhower wanted rocket artillery ready for the invasion of France. Scheduled for spring 1944, it gave Michelson's team roughly 6 months to design, test, and produce a weapon that matched Soviet systems refined through years of combat experience. The solution emerged not from advanced weapons laboratories, but from American manufacturing philosophy itself. Rather than engineering a specialized vehicle from scratch, Why not adapt existing equipment? United States already produced 2.5-ton cargo trucks in staggering numbers. The GMCC CKW rolled off assembly lines at rates exceeding 800 units daily. These Dusseldorf trucks formed the backbone of American logistics, hauling everything from ammunition to wounded soldiers. They were reliable, numerous, and completely unremarkable. Captain Virgil Grissom, an ordnance engineer assigned to Mickelson's project, sketched the initial concept on a restaurant napkin during a late-night planning session. His drawing showed a simple frame mounted on a truck bed, holding rows of rocket tubes. No complex hydraulics, no sophisticated aiming mechanisms, just tubes, a firing box, and the truck's existing mobility. The elegance lay in its brutal simplicity. According to materials from the Aberdeen Proving Ground archives, this conceptual sketch reached working prototype status in just 14 days. The rocket itself came from existing inventory. The M8 4.5-inch rocket had been developed for air-to-ground attacks, carried under the wings of P-47 Thunderbolt fighters. Ordnance engineers simply modified the firing mechanism for ground launch. Each rocket weighed 38 pounds, carried a 4.3-pound high-explosive warhead, and could reach targets 4,400 yards distant. Accuracy was poor by artillery standards. Individual rockets scattered across a target area but that missed the point entirely. These weapons traded precision for volume. A single truck-mounted launcher could fire 48 to 60 rockets in less than 1 minute, saturating an area the size of a football field with explosive devastation. Testing began at Aberdeen Proving Ground in December 1943. Engineers mounted prototype launchers on M4 Sherman tanks, creating what they designated the T-34 Calliope system, named for the circus instrument due to its pipe-like appearance. The Sherman variant offered better armor protection for crews and could accompany armored spearheads directly into combat. However, the complexity of mounting rocket frames on tanks limited production numbers. The truck-mounted variant, designated the T-27 xylophone, solved the production problem. Any maintenance company with basic welding equipment could convert a standard cargo truck into a rocket launcher in less than 8 hours. This decentralized approach allowed field units to create their own rocket artillery as needed, bypassing formal supply channels. By March 1944, several hundred converted trucks waited in British staging areas ready for D-Day. February 27, 1944, the first operational T-27 xylophone systems arrived at forward staging areas in southern England. Sergeant Malcolm Torres, a 32-year-old motor pool mechanic from Detroit, had been assigned to the 1st Infantry Division's newly formed rocket artillery platoon. He remembered standing in the rain, watching his engineers unloaded what appeared to be ordinary cargo trucks equipped with bizarre pipe frameworks. His initial reaction, shared by many soldiers, mixed disappointment with confusion. After months of rumors about America's secret superweapon, this looked like something cobbled together in a junkyard. The training officer, Lieutenant Edward Holloway, gathered Torres and 23 other men in a Quonset hut for their first briefing. Holloway had witnessed demonstration firings at Aberdeen and possessed the evangelical enthusiasm of a true believer. He explained the weapon's devastating simplicity. Each tube in the launcher frame held an M8 rocket, electrical firing circuits connected to a control box mounted in the truck cab. The driver aimed the entire system simply by pointing the truck toward the target. Elevation adjustments came from metal pins that tilted the launch frame. Range estimation relied on basic charts, nothing more sophisticated than a rifleman's range card. "Forget everything you know about artillery," Holloway told the assembled men. "You're not gunners anymore. We're delivery drivers who happen to haul high explosives at supersonic speeds." The crews practiced for 6 weeks, learning the peculiar rhythm of rocket artillery. Speed was paramount. A typical firing sequence began with the truck racing to a pre-selected firing position, often nothing more than a wide spot in a road or a cleared field. The crew would halt, verify direction using a simple magnetic compass, set elevation pins for the desired range, then unleash the entire salvo in 40 to 60 seconds. Before the last rocket cleared its tube, the driver had already engaged the transmission. The truck would be moving again within 90 seconds of firing the first rocket, racing toward its next position before German counter-battery radar could plot coordinates. Torres discovered that the weapon's greatest asset was psychological. During a demonstration firing in March, he watched from a safe observation post as 4 xylophone trucks engaged a target range marked with obsolete. tanks, and wooden building facades. The visual spectacle exceeded anything conventional artillery could produce. 60 rockets per launcher, 4 launchers firing in rapid sequence, 240 projectiles filled the air simultaneously, their smoke trails creating a surreal curtain of fire. The target area simply ceased to exist, transformed into a smoking moonscape of overlapping craters. The noise was unlike anything in the conventional arsenal. Each rocket shrieked as it flew, creating a rising banshee-like wail that carried for miles. Soldiers who heard their first xylophone barrage often compared it to the sound of tearing fabric amplified 1,000 times.
A war to the screaming of tortured souls.
This acoustic signature became the weapon's calling card. German soldiers who survived xylophone attacks reported that the sound alone event, before the explosions began, induced panic in green troops and deep unease in veterans. According to records maintained by the 1st Infantry Division's historical archives, the division received 36 xylophone launchers before D-Day, organized into platoons of 4 vehicles each. Unlike traditional artillery batteries, with their elaborate fire direction centers and forward observers, these platoons operated with remarkable autonomy. A single officer and a radio operator could coordinate a platoon's fires. Target selection often occurred at the platoon level, with commanders responding to radio calls from infantry units requesting immediate fire support. The operational doctrine emphasized surprise and mass. Xylophone platoons rarely fired from the same position twice. After unleashing a salvo, they dispersed to separate hiding positions, reassembling only when called for another fire mission. This constant movement frustrated German intelligence officers, accustomed to tracking enemy artillery units through careful observation and pattern analysis. American rocket launchers seemed to materialize from nowhere, deliver their payload, then vanish like mechanical ghosts. The Wehrmacht had no effective counter-tactics. June 7, 1940, for barely 24 hours after the Normandy landings. Sergeant Torres found himself driving his xylophone-equipped truck through the narrow, hedge-lined roads of the Cotentin Peninsula. The invasion had succeeded, but barely. American forces clung to small beachheads, facing fierce German counterattacks. Every road intersection became a potential killing ground. Every hedgerow concealed enemy positions. The centuries-old Norman bocage country fields divided by dense hedgerows growing from earth and banks created perfect defensive terrain for German infantry. Torres's platoon received its first fire mission at 1400 hours. German forces had established a strong point centered on a stone farmhouse near the village of Izigny-sur-Mer. 2 companies of American infantry had tried to advance past it, losing 17 men to machine gun fire and mortar rounds. The regimental commander, desperate to maintain momentum, called for immediate fire support. Traditional artillery was already committed to counter-battery duels against German guns. The xylophone platoon got the assignment. Lieutenant Holloway studied a hastily drawn map in the back of his command jeep, calculating angles and distances. The target sat approximately 3,000 yards from their current position, well within rocket range. He identified 4 firing positions along a dirt track that paralleled the German strongpoint. Each truck would fire in sequence, then race to a rally point 2 miles behind the front lines. The entire operation, from first rocket to final withdrawal, should take less than 8 minutes. Torres positioned his truck at the first firing point, a widening in the track where a farmer's gate had been knocked flat by earlier tank traffic. His loader, Private Danny Chen, verified the firing circuits while Torres used his compass to align the truck. The targeting was crude point the truck at the map coordinates. Estimate elevation based on range tables. Trust that the volume of rockets would compensate for individual inaccuracy. At Holloway's radio signal, Torres pressed the firing button. The truck rocked backward as 60 rockets left their tubes in rapid succession, each ignition separated by a fraction of a second. The sound hammered at Torres's eardrums despite the cotton wadding he'd stuffed in his ears. Smoke enveloped the truck, acrid and choking. Through the haze, he watched the rockets arc upward on columns of white exhaust, their trajectories wobbling drunkenly before steadying. The entire salvo disappeared beyond the hedgerows. Torres counted to 10, then jammed the transmission into gear and accelerated hard, leaving the firing position in a spray of mud and gravel. Behind them, the farmhouse strongpoint vanished beneath a hurricane of high explosives. German survivors later reported that they had no warning before the first rocket struck. One moment, soldiers were manning positions, returning sporadic rifle fire against the distant American infantry. The next moment, the world exploded. Rockets hit the farmhouse, the surrounding fields, the hedgerows, the road. The detonations merged into a single, continuous blast that lasted nearly 3 minutes as all 4 xylophone trucks delivered their payloads in overlapping waves. Obergefreiter Klaus Zimmermann, a 20-year-old machine gunner from Bavaria, survived the attack by diving into a root cellar beneath the farmhouse kitchen. His post-capture interrogation report, preserved in Allied intelligence files, provides a German perspective on that first engagement. Zimmermann described the rockets as devil's fireworks, noting that the psychological impact exceeded the physical damage. His entire squad of 9 men panicked and abandoned their positions even before the bombardment ended. When American infantry resumed their advance 15 minutes later, they found the strong point deserted except for Zimmermann and 3 other soldiers, too shell-shocked to run. June 15, 1944, 8 days into the Normandy campaign. Oberst Heinrich von Schlieben gathered his staff officers in a bunker outside Cherbourg. Von Schlieben commanded the 709th Infantry Division, responsible for defending the Cotentin Peninsula against the expanding American beachhead. His forces faced a deteriorating situation. Allied air superiority prevented daylight movement. Naval gunfire made coastal positions untenable. And now this new American weapon was systematically destroying every prepared defensive position his division had constructed over the previous 18 months. Major Ernst Hoffmann, von Schlieven's intelligence officer, presented a troubling analysis. In 8 days of combat, American rocket artillery had struck German positions at least 47 documented times. Yet German spotters had identified only 9 launching vehicles, and counter-battery fire had destroyed exactly 0 American rocket launchers. Traditional artillery warfare relied on predictable patterns: firing positions, ammunition trains, observation posts, fire direction centers. This American system seemed to operate without any of those vulnerabilities. Hoffmann displayed photographs captured from a knocked-out American vehicle. The images showed what appeared to be ordinary cargo trucks equipped with crude pipe frameworks. No armor, no sophisticated aiming mechanisms. No evidence of the precision engineering Germany applied to its own Nebelwerfer rocket systems. Yet these improvised weapons delivered more firepower more rapidly than entire German artillery battalions. The simplicity was maddening. Von Schlieven recognized the strategic implications immediately. German doctrine emphasized concentrated firepower in prepared positions. Divisions established artillery parks, carefully surveyed and registered their guns, created elaborate fire plans. This process took time and required static positions. The Americans had essentially weaponized mobility itself, as their rocket trucks could appear anywhere, fire from positions impossible to fortify, then disappear before German guns could respond. This represented not just a new weapon, but an entirely different philosophy of warfare. The German response fell victim to doctrinal rigidity and resource constraints. Von Schlieben requested additional anti-aircraft batteries, reasoning that the high-trajectory rockets might be vulnerable to flak cannons. High Command denied the request. Every 88mm gun in France was already committed to countering Allied aircraft or defending against tank attacks. He organized hunter-killer teams of motorcycle infantry equipped with Panzerfaust anti-tank rockets, hoping to catch American rocket trucks during their firing operations. The teams achieved limited success, destroying 3 trucks over 2 weeks, but suffering heavy casualties to American infantry screens protecting the launchers. By June 20th, German forces in Normandy had developed what they called the Donner Protocol, Thunder Protocol, a set of emergency procedures for units working under rocket attack. Soldiers were instructed to immediately seek hardened cover or evacuate targeted areas during the characteristic shrieking sound that preceded impacts. Company commanders received authority to abandon prepared positions if they came under sustained rocket bombardment, a radical departure from Hitler's fortress doctrine that typically demanded defense to the last man. The psychological toll proved harder to quantify but equally significant. German veterans of the Eastern Front compared the American rocket attacks unfavorably to Soviet Katyusha bombardments. The Soviet weapons, while terrifying, operated according to predictable patterns. Russian rocket artillery typically fired from positions well behind the front lines, targeting rear areas and supply routes. Soviet crews took hours to reload their elaborate launching frames, limiting the frequency of attacks. The American system was different, intimate, immediate, and apparently unlimited. German soldiers learned to fear American trucks, since any ordinary-looking cargo vehicle might suddenly transform into a rocket platform. Generalmajor Wilhelm Richter, commanding the 716th Infantry Division, submitted a report to 7th Army headquarters on June 23 that captured German frustration. According to documents later captured by Allied intelligence officers, Richter wrote, "The Americans have democratized artillery. What required a battalion of guns and hundreds of trained men they accomplish with 4 trucks and a handful of drivers. This is not warfare as we understand it. This is industrial vandalism applied to military operations." July 25, 1944, 7 weeks after D-Day, American forces remained bottled up in the Bukaj country, having advanced barely 30 miles beyond the invasion beaches. The hedgerow terrain negated American advantages in armor and mobility. Each field became a miniature fortress, each hedgerow a defensive line. German forces traded space for time, conducting a stubborn fighting withdrawal that extracted maximum cost for every 100 yards of Norman farmland. Operation Cobra aimed to break this stalemate through concentrated application of overwhelming force. Lieutenant General Omar Bradley, commanding 1st Army, planned to punch through German defenses west of St. Lay, using a hammer blow, unlike anything yet seen in the European theater. The operation would begin with a carpet bombing raid by 2,500 aircraft, followed immediately by an armored thrust spearheaded by 3 full divisions. Every available artillery piece would support the attack. And for the first time, rocket artillery would operate not as scattered platoons, but as massed batteries coordinating their fires. Sergeant Torres's xylophone platoon received its orders on July 24th. They would be part of Task Force Tenray, a provisional organization assembling every American rocket launcher in the theater. Intelligence officers had identified a total of 114 operational rocket launchers, a mix of Sherman tank-mounted Calliopes and truck-mounted xylophones. These would be organized into temporary batteries of 12 launchers each, positioned along a 3-mile front facing the German defensive line. The tactical plan called for synchronized mass fires. At H-hour plus 15 minutes, after the carpet bombing ended and before the armored divisions began their assault, all 114 rocket launchers would fire simultaneously. The resulting barrage would deliver approximately 6,000 rockets in less than 2 minutes, the equivalent of every artillery piece in 1st Army firing in unison for 30 minutes. The goal was not just destruction, but psychological paralysis, stunning German defenders during the critical moments when American tanks and infantry crossed the line of departure. Torres spent July 24th preparing his truck. Chen checked and rechecked the firing circuits, knowing that a single malfunction could result in rockets detonating on the launch frame. The crew loaded fresh rocket racks, the M8 projectiles snug in their tubes, safety pins still installed. Torres walked his firing position 3 times, memorizing every bump and pothole in the rutted track where his truck would park. Speed and precision mattered. At H-hour, 12 launchers needed to fire from positions separated by no more than 50 yards, then clear the area before German counter-battery fire arrived. The night before the attack, Torres couldn't sleep. He'd participated in dozens of fire missions since D-Day, watched his rockets tear apart German positions, witnessed the weapon's terrible effectiveness. But this felt different. 114 launchers firing together represented destructive power beyond his imagination. He thought about the German soldiers on the receiving end, young men like himself who'd done nothing more villainous than be born in the wrong country. Then he remembered the American bodies he'd seen scattered in Norman hedgerows, and his sympathy evaporated. This was war. The weapon in his hands could end it faster. Elira arrived at 1100 hours on July 25th. Torres watched from his cab as waves of bombers passed overhead, their contrails stitching white lines across the summer sky. The earth shook as bombs fell, a continuous rumbling thunder that went on for 78 minutes. Then the aircraft departed, and an eerie quiet settled over the battlefield. Torres checked his watch. H-hour plus 12 minutes, 3 minutes to go. Lieutenant Holloway's voice crackled over the radio. All X-ray units prepare to fire. Verify circuits hot. Stand by. Torres flipped the arming switches. Chen confirmed green lights across the firing panel. 2 minutes. Torres could see the other trucks in his battery, their crews making final preparations. 1 minute, he pressed his foot on the brake pedal, ensuring the truck wouldn't roll during firing. 30 seconds. His thumb hovered over the red firing button. Holloway's voice. All X-ray units. Fire. Torres mashed the button. Truck bucked and heaved as 60 rockets left their tubes. Through his mirrors, he saw a wall of smoke and fire rising from the other 11 launchers in his battery. The rockets climbed into a steel-gray sky, their combined exhaust creating an artificial fog bank. The shrieking wail, multiplied by 6,000 rockets launching simultaneously, sounded like the end of the world. July 26th. 1944, the day after Operation Cobra transformed the Normandy stalemate into a war of movement. Hauptmann Friedrich Weber found himself retreating south through the wreckage of the Panzerlehr Division. The unit had been among Germany's finest, a training and demonstration division composed of experienced instructors and the latest equipment. 24 hours earlier, Panzerlehr fielded over 200 armored vehicles and maintained cohesive defensive positions. Now it existed only as scattered remnants streaming away from the American breakthrough. Weber had survived the rocket barrage through sheer chance. His observation post sat in a stone barn's hayloft, positioned just outside the primary impact zone. He'd watched the rockets descend like iron rain, each trailing smoke, each finding Earth with a crack of thunder and a blossom of flame. The bombardment lasted 97 seconds by his watch. When it ended, Panzerlehr's carefully prepared defensive line had simply ceased to exist as a coherent military formation. The physical destruction was total, but the psychological impact exceeded all material damage. German soldiers who survived the barrage emerged from cellars and foxholes in a state of shock. Many wandered aimlessly, unable or unwilling to respond to officers' commands. Company commanders found their units had effectively disintegrated. Men abandoned weapons and equipment, interested only in putting distance between themselves and the killing zone. When American tanks began rolling through the shattered German positions an hour after the barrage ended, they encountered almost no organized resistance. Weber joined a column of retreating soldiers. Perhaps 200 men from a dozen different units, all gravitating together through some instinct for collective survival. They had lost the normal hierarchies of military order. Generals walked alongside privates. Panzer crews who'd lost their tanks marched with infantry whose units no longer existed. Nobody seemed to be in command because command had ceased to have meaning in the face of such overwhelming defeat. An SS officer, Weber, never learned his name, tried to organize a defensive position at a crossroads. Village called Kautenses. He argued that German forces retained enough combat power to slow the American advance, perhaps even stabilize a new defensive line. The proposal died when a soldier pointed wordlessly at the horizon. 4 American trucks approached on the main road. The distinctive pipe frameworks on their beds were unmistakable. Without waiting for orders, the entire column abandoned the village, scattering into surrounding fields and orchards. The rocket launchers never even fired. Their mere presence accomplished more than any barrage could have. By July 30th, American armored columns had advanced nearly 40 miles beyond their starting positions, shattering German defensive cohesion across the entire front. The breakout from Normandy, stalled for 7 weeks, had suddenly become a headlong advance. Historical analysis would credit multiple factors: Allied air supremacy, German fuel shortages, Hitler's refusal to authorize timely withdrawals. But soldiers on both sides understood that the rocket barrage on July 25th had broken something fundamental in German morale. Documents captured from 7th Army headquarters revealed the extent of German disorganization. A report dated July 27th, written by a staff officer whose name was redacted in declassified versions, described the rocket barrage as a weapon against which there is no defense and no counter-tactic. The Americans have achieved what neither the British nor the Soviets managed. They have made our soldiers fear the very roads they must travel and the very positions they must defend. Every truck becomes a potential launcher. Every distant engine sound might herald another bombardment. This is a fear that cannot be disciplined away or overcome through courage. September 15th, 1944, as Allied forces closed on the German border, United States Army issued a comprehensive assessment of rocket artillery's battlefield performance. A report compiled from after-action reviews submitted by every division that employed rocket launchers ran to 376 pages. The conclusions vindicated every decision made in those desperate months of late 1943 when Colonel Mickelson's team had improvised a weapon system on deadline. Since D-Day, American rocket artillery had fired approximately 470,000 rockets in 1,200 documented fire missions. The weapons had destroyed an estimated 800 German armored vehicles, 1,250 fortified positions, and uncounted infantry concentrations. But these numbers, impressive as they appeared, missed the larger strategic impact. German forces had fundamentally altered their tactical doctrine in response to a weapon that existed in essence because American engineers had simply bolted rocket racks onto surplus trucks. The improvised nature of the system proved to be a feature rather than a bug. Field maintenance companies across the European theater had learned to convert ordinary trucks into rocket platforms using locally available materials. When official rocket racks were unavailable, welders fabricated ersatz versions from structural steel and pipe. When M8 rockets ran short during particularly intense operations, crews improvised using demolition charges and artillery shells rigged for launch. The weapon had evolved beyond its original design parameters, becoming whatever its operators needed it to be. Sergeant Torres received a Bronze Star for Valor in October 1944, though the citation remained maddeningly vague about his specific achievements. He'd participated in over 90 fire missions, delivering approximately 5,400 rockets against German positions. His truck had been hit twice by small arms fire and once by artillery fragments, but remained operational. He'd lost to crew members Chen to a sniper in August, and his replacement to a landmine in September. Torres himself survived the war, returning to Detroit where he opened an automotive repair shop and rarely spoke about his experiences with rocket artillery. The German perspective emerged gradually through post-war interviews and captured documents. General Oberst Alfred Jodl, chief of Wehrmacht operations staff, wrote in his unpublished memoirs that American rocket artillery represented the single most significant tactical innovation of the Western campaign. He noted that German forces never developed an effective counter to weapons that combined mobility with mass firepower. Traditional artillery countertactics, the backbone of German defensive doctrine, proved useless against launchers that fired and fled before counter-battery rounds could arrive. By war's end, the United States had produced over 8,000 truck-mounted rocket launchers. Though exact numbers remain disputed due to the ad hoc nature of field conversions, the official production figures tracked only factory-built systems, missing the hundreds of launchers assembled by maintenance units using informal specifications and battlefield ingenuity. This decentralized approach to weapons production represented something distinctly Americana: willingness to prioritize practical effectiveness over theoretical perfection. The xylophone and calliope systems were retired after 1945, rendered obsolete by more sophisticated rocket artillery designs, but their operational legacy persisted. Modern multiple rocket launcher systems from the American M272, the Soviet BM-270, their tactical doctrine, two innovations developed on Normandy battlefields. The concept of mobile rocket artillery firing massed salvos before rapidly repositioning became a cornerstone of Cold War military planning. Perhaps the most fitting tribute came from an unexpected source. In 1948, a former German artillery officer named Gustav Hartmann published a tactical analysis of American rocket artillery for a West German military journal. Hartmann had faced xylophone launchers during the retreat through France and had studied captured examples after the war. His conclusion captured both professional respect and grudging admiration. The Americans did not create the most sophisticated rocket artillery, nor the most accurate, nor the most powerful. They created the most pragmatic. They took their national genius for mass production and applied it to weapons of war. They asked not, what is the best solution, but rather, what solution can we build 10,000 of by next Tuesday? In 1944, that question proved more important than any engineering excellence could answer. The story of American truck-mounted rocket artillery remains largely forgotten in popular histories of World War II, overshadowed by more dramatic weapons like the atomic bomb, or more iconic vehicles like the Sherman tank. Yet for German soldiers who heard that distinctive shriek across Norman hedgerows and French villages, for American crews who transformed ordinary trucks into instruments of mobile thunder, the weapon represented something profound: proof that in warfare as in industry, practical ingenuity often trumps theoretical sophistication. Sometimes the simplest answer is to bolt rockets onto a truck and see what happens.